Sorry, guys, for the technical difficulties in the beginning. So, what I want to just quick touch base with, and this is something that you can do your own research with. I would say, Google does have some. I mean, I used pretty much all of the platforms to kind of dig into this. Google will show you some stuff, but it doesn't go as deep as what they need to be. If you look into Seed & Company, Seed & Company is basically the head name of this, head name of what the DTCC really is. They're all intertwined together. So the Seed & Company is intertwined with the New York Stock Exchange and the Federal Reserve. So when you actually look into this, think about whenever you pay taxes. Even when you pay taxes, your taxes does not go to the federal government. It goes to the Federal Reserve. We're all our money is going to them. We're literally separate from the federal government. And people are like, well, how do we operate? Where does the money go to operate to create all these these new things, whatever? You won't want to go down that rabbit hole. But if you look into it, the IRS is connected to the Federal Reserve, which is connected to the DTCC, the New York Stock Exchange, and so forth. Literally being sold on the market. That's exactly what we're doing. So if you look into it, Seed & Company technically owns substantially all publicly issued stock in the United States. Fact check it. The estimated net worth is around $30 trillion, which is typically, if you year over year, if you go back over the last 10, 15, 20 years, year over year, when you look at their net worth, it always is equivalent to what the national debt is every year. Come down here, you look at the Paysor family, which is basically all of this is tied into this organization. When people talk about, the elites, these top wealthy families in the world, think about the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans. Think about all the people. These are all tied into one another. Paysor is probably one family you've never heard of, but they're literally on the very top of the chain because they're the ones who owns 99% of all companies sold on the New York Stock Exchange, the S&P, the NASDAQ, and so forth. So when you buy a stock, you believe you have ownership of that company, but you don't. The ownership is really the Federal Reserve routed through the DTCC. And guess who owns the DTCC? The Federal Reserve. Then that ownership goes into the Seed & Company, basically a shell company to hide all their devious shit they are doing. Now, just real quick, Seed & Company, or the DTCC, that's the same entity. Seed & Company is an electronic clearing and settlement process. So instead of brokers having shares in their proverbial vault, they deposit it in with the DTCC. So if a shareholder, like let's say Goldman Sachs, if a shareholder, for example, sells AMC's 100,000 shares to someone at TD Ameritrade, okay, those buys, TD Ameritrade buys those shares, and then the DTC system, Goldman is debited and TD is credited. So just to kind of reiterate that. So if you have, let's say you're with Goldman Sachs and you want to buy 100,000 shares of AMC, okay? Well, what that does is it goes through the DTCC, routes it into TD Ameritrade. TD Ameritrade is now credited the 100,000 shares. Goldman Sachs has debited the 100,000 shares. So when you sit there and you think to yourself, no one knows what the real numbers are. No one knows how many real naked shorts are or synthetic shares are out there. Yes, they do. The DTC has all records of everything. But guess what you can't do? You can't go in there and try to audit them. You can't go in and try to figure out, hey, I know public records information. I want to get all this information on how many of these shares are being bought and sold back and forth, and it comes through the DTCC. There's not a single thing that you can do that does not have to go through this organization. Okay? So, moving on. So if you actually go to this documentation here, and the reason why I bring this up you can take it however you want to, but the reason why I added this to this is for an understanding that you'll understand why there is a serious corruption going on. I'm going to date you back to Executive Order 13818, December 20th of 2017, blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights and abuse or corruption. Okay? Now, think about all this. We know what's been going on. We've heard the stories. We've seen it for the last 4 or 5 years of what was going on with the human rights abuse. Not only that, but the corruption within our system, okay? So when you go into specifically the human rights abuse and corruption that have their source in whole or in substantial part outside of the U.S., such as those committed or directed by persons listed in the annex to this order, have reached such a scope and gravity that they have threatened the stability of international political and economic systems. Human rights abuse and corruption undermine the values that form an essential foundation of stable, secure, and functioning societies, have devastating impacts on individuals, weaken the democratic institutions, degrade the rule of law, perpetuate violent conflicts, facilitate the activities of dangerous persons, and undermine the economic markets. So this is something that there was a president involved that actually issued this order, executive order, to try to stop and halt all of this from happening, especially when you're looking at the economic markets, because this is what's being the most manipulated that most people don't understand. So the reason why I tagged all this in here as well, who warned us about these global powers? Because think about this, everything that you have, all right, if they own everything, if the DTC owns everything, they own your shares, the best way to put this is that you don't have ownership of anything. You're being allowed to basically utilize this strategy, but you don't own it. They own it. So that's just the ball place of it. But there again, I go back. Who warned us about these global powers? Now, granted, as you know, there are multiple people throughout our history that has warned us about this. But the top figures that I could pull out, John F. Kennedy, of course, whenever Kennedy came out about the secret societies and these secret institutions and needing to be held accountable, he actually already knew this ahead of time, but he did not know the scope of the direction that they wanted to go, which is the reason why he went after them, and he was trying to warn the American people about it. Although he knew about this prior to being the president, he knew what was going on. He didn't see how drastically this could affect every single American in the U.S. and even across the world. Eisenhower came out. What was his big thing? Was about the military-industrial complex. Again, the elite global powers. These guys, these heads of the elite, they all profit at any point in time in history. There is no during the good or the bad. It's always being inherent. Okay, Reagan was another one. He was warning us about these issues. They tried to assassinate him. I do believe 100% that he was targeted. But Lincoln himself even warned us about a central banking system, which is basically what we have. We are controlled by the Federal Reserve, which is a private central bank. Okay, and there's multiple central banks across the globe. All right. So moving on into this one here, you can go, and the reason why I use this one because I was like, ooh, the Huffington or the Huff Post actually wrote something about this. Like they were. Because typically you think the Huffington Post, they're always very biased on stuff. This lady right here, Karen Hughes, she was a former lawyer for the World Bank. She was a whistleblower, reveals massive corruption. So what you need to know about this woman, former senior counsel to the World Bank, Karen Hughes, unleashed recent interviews that should shatter any remaining fairy tales about a functional and law-abiding system of banking and government. The good news is that she's part of a network of World Bank whistleblowers working tirelessly to bring out the facts. And in a recent interview, she names the names of people who are actively suppressing the facts, exposes the media for being one giant corporate shill, and reveals that all the U.S. governors and attorney generals have been notified. Matt Taibbi's recent "Everything is Rigged" piece could not be more timely and apparent in its right on target. But now we have it from people working in the highest echelons of the banking system. Check out Karen's numerous recent interviews. For example, this one on Coast to Coast, starting at 4238, or the 3-part archive on her site with Jim Fretzer from Veterans Today. Taibbi didn't tell you about the World Bank board members being blackmailed, but Karen does. I don't want to spoil the truth. It's stranger than fiction. Experience it for you. But these interviews are going to rock your world beyond WikiLeaks and Bradley Manning, which is 100% accurate. And by the way, Karen trashes the SEC as being completely captured by the banksters. So there goes any hope of them approving meaningful crowdfunding activities as per the Jobs Act. So again, I would implore you to research who she is, look her up. There's multiple ones. She actually even talks about multiple whistleblowers within the DTCC, within the World Bank. So why is all this relevant to what's happening now in the stock market? So if you go back to the 1871 Act, U.S. becomes a corporation. Now, I'm going to spare you some of this jargon right here, because you go back, why did we pick D.C.? Why did we pick, this area to be there? It was a territory of Columbia between Maryland and Virginia. But the name Columbia, of course, from Christopher Columbus. But but in 1871, the territory of Columbia officially was renamed the District of Columbia, which is where they now house the White House. But if you go back and you research what the 1871 Act really was, the U.S. became a corporation. And Washington, D.C. was its headquarters, and every president after 1871 or after Ulysses S. Grant was a CEO of a corporation. They were not the president. They were a CEO of a corporation. So you go back into this. Original Constitution reads, the Constitution for the United States of America. But when they changed this back in 1871, it became of the Constitution of the United States of America. Okay? Corporation. In 1871, we became a corporation that was ruled by the crown and still are to this day, which is why if you follow the money, where does the money go? Where does the money from the DTCC? Where does the money go from the Federal Reserve? Where does all the money go to? Follow the money. So, just to kind of real quick, I have more stuff that I am going to be putting together. Hopefully this video is now more prevalent. You can actually see the information, but I will be doing more. Again, do your research, look into this. You can pretty much utilize multiple sites. Don't expect Google to give you the answers. There is a reason why Google, Facebook, Twitter, all these big tech corporations are being sued right now, because they're suppressing the truth. Because there's so much more involved in this, you have to follow the trail. Now, you can believe what you want to. You may think that this is just a bunch of conspiracy crap or whatever, but I'm telling you, if you research the information, you follow where it's going, you can tell and see. In the last video that I did when I was showing about the DTCC, how the information that was there, the documentation about the seeding company did not get posted until literally 3 to 4 months after this article was released about this. 3 to 4 months after. That means to show you that they were like, oh crap, we may need to put something out there to kind of get people an understanding of who we really are. It's that false narrative. You cannot sit there and tell me to this day, oh, everything's a conspiracy. Well, you know what? People thought Project Mockingbird was a conspiracy too, until the truth came out about it. Until it was on live TV where they're like, yep, it existed. But guess what? We can come out about it now because all the ones who originally created this are dead. So don't ever sit there and say, oh, that's a big conspiracy behind it. Yeah, everything's always a conspiracy until the truth comes out about it. I mean, look at what aliens was a conspiracy until they started releasing documentation about it. The war, there are multiple wars that were false flags. Oh yeah, it was a big conspiracy until the truth started coming out about it. Guys, if you have to open your minds up to see what's really going on, see the bigger picture, because this stuff is really going to get real quick. So, I honestly, to me personally, I wouldn't trust anybody, especially within the money system. Anybody within the federal government, as far as the SEC, the Federal Reserve, the DTCC, the New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street, anybody on Wall Street, they're not out for our interests. They're only out for themselves. So, take it for what it is. Do your own research. Hopefully this helps you out a little bit. I'll get back to y'all with more to come pretty soon.